If China is to acquire international status in finance, we should depend primarily on Shanghai. It will take many years, but we should act now. Remarks made during an inspection tour of Shanghai, Deng Xiaoping. Libertarianism. Most of the people involved with the early creation of Neo-Reaction were former libertarians. The mutation started when Yavin read Democracy, the god that failed, and created his newfound love for monarchy. Although I disagree with him, I find myself listening to Ron Paul at least once a week to find out what the hell is going on with our economy outside the mainstream point of view. The top left-hand corner and bottom right of the political spectrum have a mysterious connection that resembles the closest thing to a dialectical relationship on a one-sided spectrum. A blog post called On Nick Land, the Weird Libertarian, explains the libertarian position. Humanism, as in the ideology that places the nature, identity and interests of the human at the center of all concerns, seeks to continually reinstantiate a unity that capitalism is tearing apart. Capitalism relentlessly, ruthlessly dismantles everything, and that includes the self, the subject, and human identity. Reterritorializing mechanisms that Land refers to as the human security system are deployed to combat this, but toil in vain against an inevitable collapse. Land's position here would be anathema to the average libertarian, whose ideology is firmly rooted in Enlightenment humanism. Libertarians, especially natural rights libertarians, are firm idealists and humanists. They believe in abstract principles, individual rights, which arise from a fixed essential human nature, and define an ideal form that present society must be measured against. Libertarians are, on the whole, utopians. They have a vision of an ideal society, designed to fit human nature, which any right political praxis must move directly towards. If this libertopia is ever obtained, it must then be frozen solid for all eternity, as any change would constitute degradation. Everyone has heard 1,000 times that libertarianism remains dogmatic and utopian. Yavin started to put this age-old trope to bed. At the end of the day, libertarians are people who want to live life with little to no government intervention. This is very compatible to communism. Uh-oh, I think I made some people angry. What Yavin gets right is that libertarianism is way too utopian to sustain itself. Murray Rothbard, his first influence, called for the entire state to be privatized, which he still advocates for in a way. Instead of learning from Land to go through, he chooses instead to submit himself to the demonic forces. Oedipus remains conservative. Nonetheless, it is a rather compelling question to find out what Land really is. He pops up and down, left and right, forwards and backwards in time. Perhaps Land is the same kid who thought that organization would occur from the bottom up, or the man who respects communist China. Either way, Land may as well be a dialectic to make sense of where he lives. The Middle Kingdom. Henrik Palmgren, introduce yourself to the audience a bit. Land. Well, it's hazy to me, so I think it will be hazy to other people. Harsh realities. Yavin often turns to Roosevelt's presidency to entertain the notion of an authority able to undermine established checks and balances. He forgets historians have debunked the claim that he pulled the country out of the Great Depression. While he attempted to run the economy like a business, he failed to create an efficient plan in the national planning boards of 1934 to 1943. Communist countries put FDR American planning to shame, and they still does till this day. What saved America from the Depression was World War II. It put thousands of people in uniforms to introduce a new workforce of huge industrial factories working on tanks, bombs and plans. Weirdly enough, people were given discrete certainty compared to all the turmoil American-style planning brought with it. The Rockefellers openly supported libertarian intellectuals and movements. Libertarians like to think of themselves as a right-wing anti-establishment movement, but once you take an in-depth look at their origins, you see that they were serving the interests of the ruling class. The pure libertarian society ends with the Tyrol Corporation. Everyone will have a free market for everything, such as airfare, hardcore pornography and an endless video game addiction. Hyper-racism will take hold when the elites alter their DNA and are stronger, faster, and smarter than any single one of us. They will be 10 steps ahead anything we do. As Nick Land says, capitalism is still accelerating, even though it has already realized novelties beyond any previous human imagining. After all, what is human imagination? It is a relatively paltry thing, merely a sub-product of the neural activity of a species of terrestrial primate. The Terminator isn't revealed to us in the machine, rather it swarms the presence of the elite. Sooner or later the elites won't do anything as pedestrian as dying. The 21st century Gilded Age awaits us. Libertarian morality becomes a dream of a past utopian. After all, the ideal bourgeois politics is the absence of politics, since capital is nothing more than a consistent displacement of social decision-making into the marketplace. Confucius turns in his grave. The great unity does not exist. No one leaves their door open, crime runs rampant, and customer protection launches 100 machine gun rounds into the chest of anyone sketchy. This sentence from Meltdown summarizes the prophecy of modernity. It's almost real. Meltdown has a place for you as a schizophrenic HIV plus transsexual Chinese Latino STEM addicted LA hooker with implanted mirror shades and a bad attitude. Acceleration defines itself as the rate of change of speed. It starts with 1, then 2, then 3, then 5, then 8 and so on. It is a monster not up for philosophical or political debate because self-propelling runaway keeps running and running. Nevertheless, old laissez-faire economics critiques itself. Capitalism isn't cursed, it is the curse. Following the Marxist tradition, this will eventually turn into its opposite, socialism. The hilarious irony is that the free market chooses communism with open arms. Socialism with Chinese characteristics. Libertarians will say we live in socialism based on the one-sided assumption that we can get rid of socialism and put capitalism back in its place. But what they don't understand is that socialism is an objective reality that is now a part of us. According to Marx, the form of the state lags behind the content of the objective revolution in the forces of production. This is why we see so many institutions outdated and are used as a site of Darwinian exchange and produce a confused and mutated form. First, let's examine the socialist mode of production. Socialism is the mode of production that encompasses social ends and breaks the anti-social ends of capitalism because capitalism ends in more money, which is a more meaningless abstraction. The process of M greater than C greater than M is no longer the ends of the economy, instead it is repurposed in a determinate social way. Profit in China is an extension of economic planning and is an index for the success or failure of an enterprise. In order to interact with this larger social stratum promoted by their economic base, the CPC is very attentive to the feedback it gets on the ground from the people. There is a completely dynamic relationship between both of them. The checks and balances come from the public itself. The CPC is directly all-powerful because it has to draw their strength from what the people want. The people are literally the things that create the mechanisms in which the party develops on the basis of a deeply rooted national characterization of the people. Socialism with Chinese characteristics means that form of that socialism along with the mass movement is going to be Chinese in nature. The majority holders of stocks in China are heavily watched by the government and accumulate more pressure on their back than profit. The CPC doesn't let them forget that the economic system of China serves social ends and not individuals. To protect the Chinese poverty alleviation program, the CPC brings their hammer down on people trying to obtain political power with monetary control. This type of state planning was then turned into a different form of decentralized planning, in which everything was no longer organized directly by the state. This allowed for a market to spring up, and these markets were already being indirectly planned by the state through Chinese policy and 5-year plans. The advanced form of socialism is the market as proved by China. Opening up their markets was not the reason that China became so prosperous. If that was the case, India would be doing just as well. China upholds a strong communist party and socialism with Chinese characteristics. This is explained well in Shanghai Future, Modernity Remade, the speed and efficiency with which the communist authorities would move Shanghai from mothballed relic of the past to stunning vision of the future would rattle the world, writes Daniel Brook, author of A History of Future Cities. In just 20 years, the city's people would go from commuting to run-down factories by bicycle to riding to the city's new international airport on the fastest train on Earth. Today in China's largest, richest, fastest-growing metropolis, a second-generated modernity 2.0, is currently underway. The reason we think that corporations would do a better job of building infrastructure than governments is because our state is outdated. If a corporation takes up an infrastructure plan, it might do a better job only because we can't even pass a single infrastructure bill in the first place. China is not an outdated state and is world renowned for its ability to quickly build infrastructure. You have to understand that high-speed rail networks are no easy task for any country to take head-on. Nick Land says the solution to global European modernity is to see the second form of modernity in specific geological civilization states that inherit socialism, modernity 2.0. Global modernization is reinvigorated from a new ethno-geographical core, liberated from the degenerate structures of its Eurocentric predecessor, but no doubt confronting long-range trends of an equally mortuary character. This is by far the most encouraging and plausible scenario, from a pro-modernist perspective, and if China remains even approximately on its current track, it will be assuredly realized. NRX with Chinese characteristics. China is to be defended, precisely because it is alien to the cathedral. For this same reason, it can be predicted with great confidence that the Occidental mimetic onslaught against Chinese civilization will be escalated to an extreme, as it becomes clear progressive pseudo-teleology is being rejected here. If China succeeds in refusing the cathedral, civilization will survive. Although I used this quote in the last post, it holds a deeper meaning of sovereignty in this context. Unlike the rest of the world, China didn't open its mouth and get fucked by Western nonsense. Deng knew the West would try to enslave the Chinese people if he didn't implement principles for the Communist Party to follow and uphold Marxism-Leninism. The Chinese people know exactly who they are because of the increasing aestheticization of the Xi era. Meanwhile, in the West, all you have to do is read early Nick Land to hear tones that are inherently nihilistic. Since the party remains smaller than the population in China, popular support is where the CPC draws their strength from. The goals set in place from the party can never be realized without popular support. Only the people have the power of judging the overall performance of the government. If the CPC completely divorce themselves with the people, it will only be a matter of time before the people divorce themselves from the CPC. The countless victory that has been won by the CPC directly translate as victories for the whole people. Xi Jinping confirms, China has learned to become masters of their own destiny. Bestowed with the national spirit of patriotism, the people are an unstoppable force that builds the country. The power of the inner forces that binds the Chinese nation lies within patriotism. This patriotic consciousness is given expression in dialectical materialism or the revolution against modern consciousness. Dialectical materialism allows everyone to develop themselves along with their country. China remains one of the only countries to activate the full dialectic and unleash the forces of production to rescue people out of poverty. On the other hand, the beautiful Chinese dream is provided by Xi Jinping in the governance of China. We are taking on this important responsibility for the nation. Ours is a great nation. Throughout 5,000 years of development, the Chinese nation has made significant contributions to the progress of human civilization. Since the advent of modern times, our nation has gone through untold tribulations and faced its greatest perils. Countless people with lofty ideals rose up for the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, but each time they failed. After it was founded in 1921, the CPC rallied and led the Chinese people in making great sacrifices, forging ahead against all odds, and transforming poor and backward China into an increasingly prosperous and strong nation. thus opening completely new horizons for national rejuvenation. Our responsibility is to rally and lead the entire party and the people of all China's ethnic groups in taking on this task and continuing to pursue the goal of the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, so that China can stand firmer and stronger among the world's nations, and make new and greater contributions to mankind. We are taking on this important responsibility for the people. Our people are a great people. During the long history, the Chinese people have worked with diligence, bravery and wisdom, creating a beautiful homeland where all ethnic groups live in harmony and developing a great and dynamic culture. Our people have an ardent love for life. They want to have better education, more stable jobs, more income, reliable social security, better medical and health care, improved housing conditions and a beautiful environment. They hope that their children will have sound growth, good jobs and more enjoyable lives. The people's wish for a happy life is our mission. A happy life comes from hard work. Our responsibility is to bring together and lead the whole party and the people of all ethnic groups to free their minds, carry out reform and opening up, further unfetter and develop the productive forces, solve the people's problems in work and life, and resolutely pursue common prosperity. Why have I emphasized this? Because only socialism can save China, and only Chinese socialism can lead our country to development, a fact that has been fully proved through the long-term practice of the party and the state. Only by upholding socialism with Chinese characteristics can we bring together and lead the whole party, the whole nation and the people of all ethnic groups in realizing a moderately prosperous society by the centenary of the CPC in 2021 and in turning China into a prosperous, democratic, culturally advanced and harmonious modern socialist country by the centenary of the People's Republic of China in 2049, so as to ensure the people greater happiness and the nation a brighter future. Mao would be proud. The Chinese people will see that, once China's destiny is in the hands of the people, China, like the sun rising in the east, will illuminate every corner of the land with a brilliant flame. Libertarian aspects. The IMF and World Bank loans are packaged with failed developmental models and regression. When the IMF gives another country money, it simultaneously dictates how the economy is functioning in another country to make sure they are dependent upon America and doesn't allow any country to develop their forces of production. Even though the IMF is a so-called global institution, it exists for America to eat. This is an act of aggressive imperialism. China is not a global institution and works out deals through diplomacy. They aren't restructuring anyone's economy to benefit them and have never gotten involved in other people's state superstructure. Since the days of ancient China, the virtues of ethical behavior dictated diplomats towards mutual dealings. On the other hand, China's Belt and Road Initiative has aided more Asian and African countries than any imperialist power has. They forgive the debts of any country who cannot afford to pay it and engage in win-win deals around the globe. They are completely non-interventionist. They take all governments of the world seriously and respect their own development path. They don't give anyone handouts, rather they will shake hands, sit down and do business with another human being. This works a lot better than blowing a country to smithereens. The flowers that the West hands out to other countries has thorns on them. China's decentralization is one of the key components to having a dynamic economy without privatization. Not only do they give power directly to the people through a relationship with their local government, but it allows for economic freedom in the evolving stages of Marxism-Leninism. Some libertarians may be frothing at the mouth, but all these things embedded into the Chinese system allows for a steady flow of competition between provinces. Let's not forget that this exists entirely through the socialist market economy. Communism is not about stifling the forces of production to have some sort of flat equality. It is about unleashing the forces of production and allowing the economy to thrive. We should all start to become Ron Paul right libertarian Marxists. China cuts the income taxes on all small businesses. All socialist states in the past have aligned themselves with the petite bourgeoisie to garner the support of small business owners. Socialism has always cut taxes, not given more. China's economy is run by state-owned enterprises. It has a market economy with the most prosperous pro-people agenda in the world. The CPC obeys strict principles that align with the people's interests, using its power to give the small entrepreneur a chance. While, in the United States, small businesses are eaten up by monopolies, the CPC unleashes the full potential of all workers from all strata of life by supporting them wholeheartedly. There is a bright future for our country, but reaching it will not be easy. We cannot accomplish our goal with one single effort, nor can we realize our dream overnight. The more beautiful the future, the harder we must work for it. The Chinese government engages in a dialectical process of having a large government, but at the same time getting off the backs of people and allowing for autonomy. Lean, mean and clean government is the most efficient. The Chinese government has a primary goal of localizing the government to each region to prevent a large central bureaucracy. Even if a large bureaucracy rises, Xi Jinping ran his presidential campaign on corruption that had previously plagued the CPC. The Chinese Communist Party teaches Marxism alongside Confucianism to promote self-governance and ways to live your life. People live in commutative lifestyles, while still having their direct purpose vested in China. At the local level, the CPC is not putting pressure on average citizens. They have economic and social freedoms we can only dream of. There have been plenty of accounts of when the people don't agree with the government on a local level, and when the people voice their opinion, Chinese police forces back off. It always comes back to understanding that the only reason for the Chinese state apparatus is for the betterment of its people. The Chinese vision of state power extends itself towards a popular front that is populist in nature. The popular state is the only thing that can free people from the chains of institutional madness. This answers the old question of being given conscious recognition through the objective sets of relations between a people's state. The CPC promotes learning to enhance your capabilities to meet the needs of the whole people. Most importantly, they stress that it is important to apply these things and stay close to grassroots so that you never forget what makes you as a person. The Chinese society is the best school for people to learn from outside the rigid constraints of institutions. The real nature of men and women are their entire social relations. The role of the party is not to be involved with everyone's life 24/7. Their role is to build a society that articulates the people's common interests and to create a favorable environment for people to live out their lives. Especially, an environment that young children can grow and develop without having to worry about their safety. The party understands that your youth is something you should make the most of, and the future exists to reflect upon these memories. When the youth get older, China creates actual opportunities for its up-and-coming youth, instead of unnecessary money printing. Technocratic scepter. Yavin is openly technocratic about how things should be run in his ideal society. His most recent adaptation of the state was created in his blog post Bitsian, How Bitcoin Becomes a State. He decided to take the side of the non-human cold calculations and pure math that is involved in Bitcoin. He used the Confederacy and ISIS as examples of new states that are formed through terrorist force. However, the contingencies of statehood run much deeper than this. The Saudi Arabia created ISIS, only to soon condemn it later because they were shown military force by their own creation. The Confederacy was formed by the Southern slave-owning aristocracy that seceded from the other states of America, while being heavily funded by the British. Both of these small instances of artificially contrived states are inorganic moments in history created by a higher power. As Yavin likes to say, if you are given power, you really don't have any. My point is that artificial states don't produce any organic civilizational reality. A similar thing will happen in a technocracy, especially one that looks to merge the spheres of politics and economics into one. A government that forms entirely out of the control of the monetary system is not enough to gain the love of the people. I assure you that people in the United States don't want to be ruled by alien octopus robots. Speaking of that, Yavin thinks Saruman should rule all of Middle-earth because he is the wisest and smartest. He ignores the natural order in Tolkien's world and says, No, I only like the ultimate form of intelligence to govern. This ultimate form of intelligence gives its own artificial realization of thought. This means it slowly divorces itself for the good and base material on which it stands. Is this not an eye emancipating itself from all other things to become our ruler? Now with that out of the way, I can explain to you why China is not a technocracy. Perhaps we have to brush up on our Schmidtian concepts of legitimacy a bit. The reason why the underlying elements of the party are not technocrat is because the CPC draws their strengths from people alone. The CPC also accounts for deeper political realities that are not based off technicalities, but an almost religious connection between the people and the state. The origins of most ancient polities, statehood, that morphed into the modern state began with a real connection to religion. This includes the ancient Egyptians and the Minoans who had palace economies. This beautiful event of giving the political good a shelter is no longer found in a technocracy. The question of humanism that is applied to Marxism is a measure or feedback for the state that acts as information on developing the forces of production or directly providing for the people. The CPC may have engineers in their party, but the ones who are responsible for the plans in the first place are the people. The people are allowed to go to the open debates in China at all times. This process ends amidst the populist legitimacy of Xi Jinping putting policies into reality. China has a direct tradition for the way in which their country is ruled. They don't hand over their government to some utilitarian purpose like we do in the United States. China has a long history of meritocracy and rewards you for hard work. It is extremely hard to get into the CCP. It took Xi Jinping 10 tries to get into the party, and his father was a first-generation revolutionary. Their understanding of meritocracy is one that understands the whole being of Chinese people. Historically, many party officials were subjected to the countryside because that's where the real heart and soul of China remains till this day. Capitalism and technocracy have similar contradictions. Sometimes, Chinese policy making will result in the reduction of profitability in order to build infrastructure. This is because profitability will never address the actual human needs and human wants. If we view profit as purely magical numbers, instead of human wealth in the form of material things, then it will inevitably come into contradiction with the way in which people subsist. Technocracy has no ideological basis and has no feedback loops that boomerang reciprocations between people and the state. Historically, the only way people restored their ways of life through the future is through Marxism. Stalinism was a return to Ivan the Terrible politics and a rejection of the Western-inspired reforms of Peter the Great. Every communist must have an understanding of their country that is deeply national. Technocracy does not provide any of the answers to these questions. Even if someone like Elon Musk were to run as a technocrat, he will garner his support from his vision of a sci-fi future and his personality that people like. This isn't from his cold calculation of numbers that a technocracy is. Elon Musk is a builder and seller of dreams that pathologically entrench themselves into the mind of Americans. However, projecting an aesthetic doesn't allow you to hold power. In the case of China, it's not just because they have an ideology, it's because they have a deeper relationship with their people. In actuality, tech monopolies are actually hindering the forces of production. Like how Google squashes all tech startups by buying them off and not knowing what to do with them after the fact. This is then leading to a stagnation of innovation. China and fascism. Yavin calls China a populist and fascist dictatorship. I'll explain to you why that's subtly false. The fascist countries of the 20th century were not ruled by the popular will of their people, but by putting people into hypnotized psychosis. In the case of Italy, Mussolini was made prime minister by the king, which means he had no power at all. In Machiavellian terms, he was a bottom. It's difficult to say he was a populist because he passed the Acerbo laws to give his deputies a majority in parliament and maintained most seats. In 1924 he won the election, which allowed him to do whatever he wanted while he was in power. Not even Mussolini's cult of personality was real. He got his facial expressions and body language from the makest movies. Hitler and Mussolini were anarchists. not unlike the ones in the streets today. Come on, you know what I mean, the people wearing black using bombs and daggers. The corporate state was just syndicalism with a Proudhonian nationalist twist. Put Noah Chomsky as the president, it will turn into a similar-looking fascist uproar. Fascism is not unlike liberalism, it is an extra layer thrown on top of liberalism that abolishes the law and holds the revolution in the forces of production to a standstill. He was overthrown by the people. The Fasci Italiani di Combattimento Party was filled with weirdos who had a longing for more war and used their psychological struggle to beat workers to death. Even if Italy was given the land promised in the Treaty of London, that wouldn't have stopped Mussolini from taking his turn towards people like Georges Sorel. His plan was to entrench Italy into perpetual warfare. The March on Rome was a myth and propaganda for the Italian people to eat up. Mussolini had already formed a government prior to the event. China is not class collaborationists because there is a class struggle under stages of socialism, as Mao pointed out. The CPC recognized that the forces of production will change and struggle will carry out through the country. Class conflict can also take the form of the imminent development of society in such a way that comes at the expense of certain class and benefits another. The CPC takes the side of the hard-working masses. Even private companies in China are watched by the state. They were still built up from the soil of the Chinese people. The state was the main reason for the company's existence and its integration into planning. The fascist governance didn't have the specific control over the companies to be able to completely eliminate industries and completely change the structure of their frozen corporate economy. The fascist government propped up already bankrupt companies. China remains a dictatorship of the proletariat because the proletariat was uprooted from its means of subsistence and its means of production. The proletarian dictatorship functions in such a way that it allows the Chinese people to endure revolution in the forces of production. Understanding Chinese communism requires an understanding of land reform. Despite the proletarianization that came with Chinese modernization, all the Chinese people still have a social security safety net in the form of agricultural plots of land that are granted to them by the state. Land reform is the only thing in history to produce an independent and alternative industrialization. It allows for surpluses of agricultural production to be directed for the specific purpose of industrialization. China and the USSR found out that civil society and the state were two separate things, but in the case of fascism, Mussolini thought the state and civil society were one. The state must recognize its own limitations, just as Stalin knew that there needs to be a socialist commodity because you can't steal the peasants' things. The Marxist tendency towards populism goes beyond any political spectrum. Marxism is the real